So let's go ahead and pray together. We really thank God for you and for your presence with us wherever you are. And we appreciate the opportunity to know that wherever we are, that God is there with us. So let's go ahead and bow together and pray. Father, you are an all-powerful and an incredibly accessible God. And Father, when we consider those two realities at the same time, we are just left with a deep sense of awe, knowing that you are sovereign and supreme and that there's not a square inch or a centimeter of our universe that is outside of your authority. And yet we could draw near to the throne of grace and find peace and strength and perspective. And so, Father, we pray that as we worship you, because you are here with us, that you would remind us that the ground where we are seated or standing is truly holy ground. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. One of the professors I had at Dallas Seminary was literally there for 50 to 60 years, teaching young men and young women the ins and outs of what it meant to be a representative of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And this guy was such a great communicator. He was funny, he was convicting, he was animated, he was on target. And one of the things that our professor loved to say, which was actually a warning, is he said that it is a sin to bore people with the Word of God. And that really scared us because we thought, we don't want to sin. I mean, that's why we're in seminary. But then we thought, wow, it's not always easy to relate and to enrich and challenge people with our talks. And so when he said it's a sin to bore people with the Word of God, we thought, ooh, that's really scary. And so that's why that we are in seminary and they teach us how to preach, because for most of us that go to seminary, we think we're already good communicators. We think we're interesting and relevant and funny and biblical and relational, but we don't really know what we're talking about. Like most of us, we're just a lot better in our own mind than we actually are in real life. And so there's a little bit of a humble pie that we have at seminary, and they required us as students to take 3 classes to learn how to communicate the Word of God to people. Because so much of our classes in seminary, graduate school, preparing men and women for ministry, is focused on helping us to be faithful to the text. It teaches us how to study the Word of God and to be faithful in transmitting and communicating the Word of God just as God communicated it to us. But then the preaching professors would help us not only to be faithful to the text, but also to be relevant to the audience. Because we want to connect the Word of God with the people in our lives. We want to understand the ancient text in light of our contemporary challenges. And so we talk about a variety of things in our classes, teaching us how to preach, how to communicate, how to bring the ancient text into our everyday world. But one thing that we never, ever talked about, was preaching to a largely empty room, which is what we have today. I mean, I see maybe, the people that are paid to be here, myself and the staff, and then I see some volunteers that are part of our leadership and the skeleton crew with our sound and our technology. But basically, it's less than a dozen people. And so that's really tough for me because eye contact is really important to me. And so when I look at people, I look at people's lives. And so I think of the Word of God as it relates to people and the challenges and the opportunities and the disappointments and the things that they're going through. But because of the serious concern that weighs on all of our hearts, with COVID-19 becoming a global pandemic. I mean, just 2 weeks ago when I preached, if you look at the Johns Hopkins sites, there were 83,000 cases in which people tested positive for the virus. If you check that same site, it's nearly double. 165,000 people around the world have tested positive. And so you can't go to a place like Costco or Target or Trader Joe's or Sam's or even Vons and without encountering masses of people, incredible lines, empty shelves. And it's because of the anxiety that we feel within our hearts. And so that's why, as Dave just shared, we've canceled our services and our large gatherings here on our campus through the end of March and possibly longer, depending on how things evolve. But it's not because we're succumbing to fear. It's because we want to exercise prudence and good judgment. We want to make sure that the curve is flattened so that the healthcare industry and community in our nation is not overwhelmed, as we're seeing in some places around the world. And so we recognize and clutch on to two realities simultaneously. The first reality is our life is fragile, but the greater reality is that our God is eternal. Our life physically is fragile, but our God eternally is sovereign. And that simply means that God is master over all of his creation. And there are seasons of our life, just like now, where the empty shelves can have a catalytic effect on our own hearts and where we see anxiety. And I probably, when I walk into Costco, I'm sure that I'm a man on a mission and I show a little bit of tension, anxiety, anticipation. If there's going to be rolls of towels and toilet paper and water and essentials. But in seasons of anxiety, in times when we feel helpless and vulnerable, we are here to tell you at home and here in our sanctuary that it's okay. It's a part of being human. And the absence of our control actually readies us for the presence of our Creator. Because I like to be in control. And maybe you like to manage things. And we have things put in its place. But the absence of our control, that sucks. That is so hard. When you don't know if there's going to be stuff out there, it creates that sense of anxiety and uneasiness. But the absence of our control actually is exactly where God wants you. Because it readies us for the presence of our Creator. It gets us in that posture of dependence on our knees, where we look to God and trust in Him. You see, whenever we feel that we can't do something for God, He says that we can do everything through Him. Even as we debate who we are, God declares, I am who I am. Even as we sometimes in a dumbfounded, perplexed, flummoxed position, as we wonder, and even people around us wonder who we are, the Lord God, creator of heaven and earth, the God that is sovereign over all of creation, that is just as accessible to you as the refrigerator door that you open and the loved one that you're seated beside. In the midst of our questions and doubts, the Lord declares, I am who I am. We can always serve God with our integrity because He never leaves us without His authority. And that's a part of our 2020 vision. I mean, I guarantee you, when we were thinking and praying about our vision for Bread of Life Church this year, multi-congregational, many services, many cultures, we thought 2020 vision, living with God's perspective, but nowhere on our radar was COVID-19. Nowhere in our wildest dreams was this novel coronavirus that would strike our hearts with anxiety. But one thing that we did know is that as we were entering into a brand new year, that we would face challenges, opportunities, questions. that were not easily answered, that we couldn't just simply turn to the back of the book and turn it upside down and find the answers to our deepest problems. But we know that God is sovereign, even in the midst of our life that's fragile. And that a person of integrity, and we're going to see a person of remarkable integrity that didn't really get there in the beginning. Because he's not hey, God, I'm here. I'm ready for you. He's more of a, God, I'm stepping back. It's not for me. But we're going to see that a person of integrity establishes a platform with authority. A person of integrity will always establish and build and erect a platform with authority. And the title for this morning's talk is Roll Call. And the way that I'm spelling roll, because you could spell it in a few ways, is R-O-L-E. And we're going to look at a roll call because in a totally odd, out of the ordinary way, God shows up at the workplace of someone who once fled in fear as a fugitive from the nation's most powerful leader. And rather than being marginalized or written off, God says, you know what? I'm going to call you to a new role. I want to give you, you're not a has-been, you're not a written off, marginalized, pushed aside, useless to the kingdom of God type of person. But even though you did something you shouldn't have done, even though you were scared spitless and ran as a fugitive from the nation's most powerful leader, God says, I have a new assignment for you. I have a new role, a project. In fact, it's not just a role, but it is the role. It is the most pivotal, strategically celebrated role that the nation of Israel, the people of God, the old covenant community would rally around and celebrate year after year as their greatest mark of independence and identity as a people. But the role that God calls this individual to, just as we feel today, created a sense of mild anxiety. Let's even go further. It struck him with absolute terror. He did everything he could to wiggle his way out of that situation. And laboring as a shepherd in a Midianite field for the past 4 decades, I think he's thinking retirement. I think he's thinking his after-work life. But God has a new assignment for this one-time refugee and fugitive. And it's a job that entails confronting this fearsome, mighty leader that he actually was absolutely petrified and scared of. The leader that he had fled from to preserve his own life. And so the new position requires an 80-year-old shepherd named Moses to go back to the land that he ran as fast as he could to get out of, to go back to Egypt. And it's a move that stretches his trust in the Lord at a pivotal and crucial period for the whole nation, just like us. And so if you have a Bible, I'd like you to turn or tap over to Exodus chapter 3. Exodus chapter 3. And we're going to look at a good part of chapter 4 along with this third chapter. In chapter 3, verses 1 to 10, we see how God elevates us for big moments. Moses thought his big moment was past. He thought he was over. He was looking into retirement land. Disneyland is shut down. He wanted to go to retirement land, thinking about the next act that he would do, the things that he would enjoy in his lifetime beyond his career in the family business for his father-in-law Jethro. But at this moment, God says, no, I got a big moment for you. And then in the balance of chapter 3 through the lion's share of chapter 4, We see, like Moses, that we could easily dismiss ourselves with little excuses. And that's what they are. God has this massive moment for us. And Moses, just like us, comes up with minimal, minor, minuscule excuses that we try to launch at God and say, God, it's not me, it's she. It's not me, it's them. Why don't you pull someone else into it? I'm not worthy of what you want. And so, completely unprepared for what's around the corner for himself, as well as God's people, Moses catches an unusual glimpse of the God whom he worships. And through his experience as a shepherd turned national deliverer, we see how God elevates us, you and me, for big moments. Take a look at Moses' story beginning in Exodus chapter 3, verses 1, 2, and 3. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, also known as Sinai, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. And Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, the crazy thing is it didn't burn up. And so Moses thought, I'll go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. And doing what he's done for 40 years, caring for his father-in-law's sheep, helping the family business, Moses actually leads his flock to a remote part of the wilderness to Horeb, also known as Sinai. And this is the place that we know that later on that God is going to communicate the commandments of God for the people of God. And so even before that significant moment, there is a minor moment that is massive in the life of Moses to prepare him for what's ahead. In the place the angel of the Lord shows up, there's this revelation that Moses sees that he's never seen before. There's a bush on fire, but the bush is not being consumed. And living here in Southern California, in Los Angeles and San Diego and San Bernardino, we understand the danger and the threat of wildfires because the fires are just merciless. They're consuming, they're destructive. And so whenever something's on fire, we thank God for the first responders and how they put their lives on the line to extinguish the fire, because if they don't do it, it'll just absolutely devastate that part of the real estate. But Moses sees something that is crazy. It's a bush that's on fire, but it's not consumed, it's not destroyed, it's not gone. So Moses, thinking to himself, says, I'll turn aside to see this amazingly strange sight, why the bush doesn't burn up. He's thinking, how could this be? And I don't know if he had an engineering background or a science background or even a forestry background or natural science background, but he was intrigued by the sight, so he decides to get a little bit closer. And then what happens next actually raises up the freaking out level through the roof. Because it's one thing to see a bush on fire that is not being consumed, and it's an absolutely other thing to have this bush that's on fire, ablaze, start speaking to you. And that's exactly what happens. Verse 4, when the Lord saw that he had gone over to the bush to look, God called out to him from within the bush, Moses! Moses! And Moses said, here I am. I don't think he said, here I am. I don't think he said, hey, here I am. I think he said, here I am. Totally freaked out. Absolutely beside himself. A bush that was on fire that would not be consumed. How crazy is that? And then this bush that's on fire, not being consumed, it's not just crackling and, oh, did he say my name? Or are those crackles actually words that he could understand? No, it was absolutely unmistakably clear that a voice came out of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And Moses naturally is drawn even closer. And God said, verse 5, do not come any closer. Stop in your tracks. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Moses just thought it was a place where he brought his sheep, his father-in-law's sheep. He thought it was just the far side of the mountain where he can get a little bit of quietness and enjoy the beauty of God's creation, looking up at the stars. But the side of this bush that was not consumed, although ablaze, the bush that called out to him, Moses, Moses, and Moses said, here I am. God stops him in his tracks because if he goes any further, there's a possibility that Moses could actually die right there, because Moses says later in Exodus that no one can see God, the face of God, and still live. And so God says, do not come any closer, and he gives them a command, take off your sandals, as an expression of, it's not because he was Asian, okay? He said, take off your sandals because that was a sign of humility and confession and contrition and recognition of the holiness and the purity of the Creator. And so although at first I don't think Moses senses that this is a God thing, this bush on fire that's not consumed, but as God speaks to him, I think he comes to grips that it is a God thing. That God is revealing the brilliance of his glory, the wonder of his majesty in this place of worship. And then God said, it's more than an angel of the Lord. But in verses 4, 5, and 6, it's clearly God himself who shows up. Then he said, I am the God of your father, Moses, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And at this, Moses hid his face because, as I just mentioned, he was afraid to look at God, not because he couldn't look, but because if he did look, he could possibly die in a moment, because the holiness and the purity of God were just too great. Absolutely bewildered, Moses comes to a developing realization that it's not just some weird thing that's going on with the bush, but that the God of his father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, the God who makes promises, the God who enters into covenantal relationships with us, the God who is always faithful, who never ditches his people, who never is fickle or undependable, the God who loves you and me, and the God who will never abandon us, that's the God who shows up to Moses. And Moses comes to a realization that this place of worship is not an accidental thing, but it's something that's a part of God's perfect plan. And it's something that will involve Moses in accomplishing his purpose. There are moments in your life and my life that we might just be going to the far side of the mountain and we think we're just getting a little bit of rest or looking up at the sky or just hanging out with friends, or maybe, we're not thinking about God. But all of a sudden this burning bush, not literally, but something like that, pops up in our life, and it has divine fingerprints. And it's obvious that God is in the picture, and God is preparing you to realize he wants you to stop what you're doing. It's just like what's going on in our nation, what's going on around the world. that people are literally stopping in their tracks and they're heading to places to obtain things that they believe and that we believe will prepare us for the future. Because we always want to be prepared for the worst, even as we hope for the very best. And God is showing up in your life and mine, and God has fingerprints that says, this is me. I want you to stop where you are, take off your sandals, humble yourself, come to a realization that I am in charge and I am in control, and I want you to be a part of accomplishing the purposes and plans that I have for you. Having shown Moses the glory of his presence through the sight of a bush on fire that doesn't burn up, and through the sounds of his own name, Moses, Moses. But even greater, the name of the God whom he worships, the God of his father, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and the promise that he made back then to the patriarchs that he would bless the nations of the earth through the people of God. That Moses is beginning to even get a sense by this name of God and this revelation that it's not just about his responsibility as a shepherd in the family business caring for the sheep on the far side of Mount Horeb, but it's being reminded of the faithfulness of God to the people of God, that he would bless every nation on the planet, every people that he has created through the chosen people of God. And God explains the goodness of his plan. Take a look at verses 7 through 10. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering, so I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them out of that land into a good and a spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. I just heard earlier, it's really hard to find milk today. But this is an expression of the prosperity and the abundance and the fertility of the land, that the people of God would not only be delivered from bondage and torture and misery in Egypt, but he would bring them into a land that was not theirs, that belonged to other people, but God would give it to them because God owns all of creation. And it was a land not with empty shelves, but it was a land with everything that they could ever imagine. A land of abundance and prosperity flowing with milk, fat-free, 2%, whole milk, whatever, and honey. The home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, and we would say the parasites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. And I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. I've got something in mind for them, God is saying. And Moses has got to love everything he hears until he hears verse 10. So now go. What? So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh, that dude that scared you spitless, that powerful leader without mercy that you ran as far away from as possible. Yeah, that's the guy. That guy, that Pharaoh, capital P. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Moses can't believe his ears. 7, 8, 9. Moses loves everything that he hears. God has heard the cries of his people. It's been a long time, 4+ centuries, specifically 430 years. He's heard the cries of God's people for mercy and for help. saying, God, deliver us. And God says, I've heard your cries. I've seen the oppression. I'm going to deliver you by my powerful hand out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Moses says, yeah, God, you do it. Yeah, God, I'm with you. This is what we've been praying for. This is what we've had generation after generation after generation pour out their hearts with. And you've seen those evil Egyptians, and I know you've got something in store because you are a just and all-knowing God. You're not going to let them slide. And Moses is saying, man, this is the best news ever. I love it. It's like going to a website, opening up your favorite news page, think, wow, I can't believe it. And Moses is totally down on everything that God says until God gets to verse 10. Because God says, well, that's my plan for Israel, but guess what, Moses? You the man. You're my leader. So I want you to go back to Egypt, and I want you to go to that big, bad, terrible Pharaoh, and I want you to tell him my plan. That I'm going to deliver my people, and that I will judge the Egyptians. And see, this is a man who had a passion for justice, like many of you do. He was an advocate for what's right. And so one of the reasons, actually the reason why he fled Egypt and escaped as far as he could, becoming a fugitive from Pharaoh, in the crosshairs of his wrath, is because he saw an Egyptian beating up a fellow countryman, a Hebrew. And he did vigilante justice. He took matters into his own hand, and he struck that guy, and he killed the Egyptian. And then when he saw two of his own people arguing with one another, and he said, hey, you guys get along. We're all the same people. And they said, hey, you didn't do the same thing to one of us, what you did to that Egyptian guy? And Moses freaked out and says, oh, my goodness, word really spreads even before, the internet, and even before text messaging, and even before social media. I mean, how did you guys hear? And so then he ran for the hills. A one-way ticket out of Egypt to Midian with never an intent to go back to Egypt. But that's what God wants to do. There's no deliverance of the nation. There's no rescue of his people without the willingness of his servant. When you and I prove trustworthy and reliable right where we are, when we receive the responsibilities, not complaining and not grumbling and not wishing we were somewhere else or with someone else, having another set of responsibilities and relationships, but when you and I faithfully handle what God is giving to us right now, God says, and Jesus affirmed, that he may call you to another role as a reward for your faithfulness. He might give you an opportunity that is not on your radar, that's not something you anticipated, but is something that is another realm of his kingdom. And he'll position you and even reposition you in a place where he can use you in another way. When Helen and I first and then seriously considered the possibility of relocating from Austin, Texas to here in the South Bay of Los Angeles, we wrestled with a variety of factors, and I appreciate Elder Neil, who's here with his wife Stella, and the impact that they had in our lives as we contemplated that decision. But, we were still relatively young. I was 34 years young. I can't tell you Helen's age, but she's 2 years and 5 months younger than me. We were just married for 7 years. Our son Christopher was only a year old. This is BJ before Jonathan. And so we were just recently met, simply established in ministry, involved in things that we were just learning as we go, with a church that we are forever indebted to and deeply love in Austin, Texas. But I felt concerns about whether or not I was the right fit, whether we were a good match. I mean, Bread of Life, to be honest, guys, Bread of Life Church, we celebrated 53 years anniversary, but not every one of those 53 years was really sweet. We have a complicated history as a church. There's a complexity of the history, and it wasn't an easy decision, and it was partly because of not only the church, but also partly, maybe even largely, about ourselves. Feeling inadequate, young, inexperienced. And it didn't help that after I came, that one of the longtime members of the church, just a few years older than me, came up to me and said, "Oh, Dan, I'm really glad that you're here. I just wish you were a little bit older." Oh, you ever get backhanded praise? It's like, "Oh, thank you." Oh! I mean, on the one hand, you felt like, "Oh, he's glad I'm here." But on the other hand, you should be older. And the dude was only like 3 years older than me, but I could understand what he's saying, because he understood the complexity and the nature of the ministry here. And someone 34 years young, I mean, what can you really do at 34 years young? I'm not bitter toward him. I just have a good memory. But I'd be lying to you if I didn't say it rattled my confidence. It raised a little bit of a question within my heart. And Moses, that's him. You see, as we look at characters from the Old Testament, we're talking about everyday people just like you and me, with exceptional vision because they see God beyond themselves. And Moses was not that guy full of confidence, and not that person who walked into a room and was just charismatic and influential and a magnet for charm. He looked at his shoes, sandals. He didn't feel really confident about himself, and his level of confidence in himself is not only being challenged internally, but he anticipates the external challenges that will come his way. And so rather than jumping at the opportunity, Moses balks. He hesitates to do what God commands. You see, rather than saying, "God," he didn't go to Indeed and check out the jobs. "Oh, leader out of Israel, for Israel out of Egypt, I think I'll apply." That was not him. But Moses said, "This is too big for me. I'd rather just stay with the sheep. They're dumb, but they don't, they're not Pharaoh. At least they follow me." And he shows not a shred of interest in going back to Egypt. And what I love about Moses and the story here is that the way he reacts mirrors my own heart and maybe your heart, where we dismiss ourselves, where we say, "No, God, not me, but he. God, not me, but she. Anyone but me." And we dismiss ourselves with little excuses. Take a look at the first one. We doubt our fitness. Verses 11 and 12. But Moses said to God, it's not good when the Bible starts with "but Moses." Usually you should say, "and Moses did what God wanted him to do." And Moses said, "Yeah, God, I'm the man." No, but Moses. That's not good. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" Me? God, did you message the wrong person? God, do you know I'm Moses, the fugitive, fleeing Egypt, scared spitless of Pharaoh? I mean, God, I'm not the big dude up there. I'm the little guy here. That's why I can't even work with people. I'm working as a shepherd. I can't even get a job outside my family. I'm working in the family business with my father-in-law. Thank God for the opportunity that he's given me. And Moses doubted his own personal fitness. He says, God, I hear what you're saying, and that is a job that requires the most outstanding candidates. You have to have a global search to find the right person. God, why did you come to this far side of Mount Horeb and find me with my little sheep? God, I am not the right person. Don't you look at my resume? I mean, little dude, fugitive, scared of Pharaoh. I can't go back to him. I have so many problems, God. Too many issues. A plethora of weaknesses. And this is not far from us because like Moses, we could easily doubt our own fitness and we say, God, you know what? That's a big job. That's a huge opportunity. God, did you message the wrong person? Did you speak the right name? I know you said it twice, but God, did you mean like, not Moses, but Michael? Or did you mean, Matthew, but not Moses? You see, we could be a lot like Moses and say, God, did you call Dan? Or did you want someone else? And we doubt our fitness and we say, God, you can't work through me. I mean, just look at my resume of experience. Look at the way that I'm wired. Look at my personality. And we minimize and discount our usefulness in fulfilling God's plans. In other words, we question God as our ultimate HR person who says, no, we're the person that they should hire. And God says, no, I am right. But we doubt our fitness. And so God said in verse 12, I will be with you, and this will be a sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses is not his own. He's not a solo entrepreneur. He's not doing it all by himself. But God says, I am with you. And that's all you need. The sign that Moses has been sent is that they will eventually worship again on this same mountain. You see, he's saying, go back to Egypt, but then you're going to come back here. Don't worry, Moses. I know you like this place. You're going to come back to this place, and it's going to rock. You're going to see the glory of God in a way that you have never seen before. And you're going to hear the truth of God spelled out in commandments and in instruction like you could never imagine in your wildest dreams. And that'll be confirmation, the success of your mission, that you will go to Pharaoh and Pharaoh will let you go, that he'll have, buyer's remorse or seller's remorse, and he'll chase after you. But God says, I will be with you, and I've got that covered. And so when you feel unqualified, when you feel unfit, God says the exact same thing to you, that I will be with you. But then take a look at verse 13. Because Moses thinks, well, what about others? They might question my authority. Who are you to do this, Moses? Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me, and they ask me, well, what's his name? Then what shall I tell them? What if I go back to your people, God, and I say, God has sent me to lead you out of the terrible place of Egypt because he's heard our prayers for these 400 plus years, and God is going to deliver us, and he's appointed me to lead you out of the nation. But then Moses is a little bit shy, a little bit scared, we have a document with a signature of a name that backs whatever that document is asking for. And Moses gets that. He says, God, if I go there, they're going to laugh me out of the room. They're going to laugh me out of the crowd. They're going to say, what's the authority? What's the basis that you do this? And Moses says, how do I answer? And God said to Moses, verse 14, this is what I want you to say. This is my name. Take notes, Moses. You ready? Ready? I am who I am. Moses probably looked up. Say it again. I am who I am. This is what you were to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. You see, Moses wonders, who am I? But God declares, I am who I am. And when God declares, I am who I am, God is simply telling us that God is above us, that God is sovereign, that God is master, that God is in control, that God is Lord over all of creation, that everything is under his authority. It's not only saying that God is above us, but that God is with us, that God is present with us wherever we go, that God is for us. He's our advocate. He's our defender. He will champion our cause. And not only is God above us and God is with us and God is for us, but even the greatest thing is that God is in us. That God resides within us, and that gives us the calm and the peace that we need most. More important than who we are is who God is. And as we come to grips with the God that we worship and that we represent to others, when we see that God is, I am who I am, that he's above us and he's with us and he's for us and he's in us, then we will minister and we will serve and we will live with his authority. But take a look at verse 16. God gets into a deeper and fuller explanation. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name that you shall call me from generation to generation. I mean, people know me through different names. Sometimes they call me Dan, others Danny, Daniel. Maybe, and they represent different parts of my lives. But God says, no, my name is the same forever, from generation to generation. I am the faithful God that you can always rely upon. And God spells out a short summary of Moses' job description. If God's going to post the job and explain it to Moses, he spells out the requirements of what it takes to be a one-time fugitive, now called national deliverer in the hands of I am who I am. Verse 16, go assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, appeared to me. Let them know what you've experienced at this burning bush, what you've seen and heard, and said, I have watched over you and have seen what has been done to you in Egypt, and I have promised to bring you out of your misery in Egypt into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. The elders of Israel will listen to you. Don't sweat. Then you and the elders are to go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. No shaking in the voice, no hesitation. It's a declaration of reality. The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt, God says to Moses, will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. A harbinger of the 10 plagues. A glimpse of coming judgment. And so I will stretch out my hand and strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I will perform among them. After that, he will let you go. And I will make the Egyptians favorably disposed toward this people, so that when you leave, you will not go empty-handed. Every woman is to ask her neighbor, and any woman living in her house, for articles of silver and gold and for clothing with which you will put on your sons and daughters. and so you will plunder the Egyptians. In a nutshell, God maps it out for Moses. He says, you're going to talk to the leaders, they'll listen to you. You're going to talk to Pharaoh, he'll listen to you. He'll have, seller's regret, but he'll let you go, and it's all going to be good. In other words, the mission will be accomplished. Seems pretty easy, right? Seems like Moses should just go do it. But like what Moses felt back then is what we know today. It's one thing to know what God says. It's something totally different to do what he says. So that's why there's a lot of people that have been in church for years that have a lot of good knowledge, but they're fools because they don't put into practice what they know. And so God says to Moses, you know the plan, you know the success, I guarantee it. And Moses should easily say, I'm there, God. Hesitant, reluctant, but now I'm with you. But no, take a look at verse 1 of the 4th chapter. Moses offers up a third excuse that could resonate with you and me. Others challenge our spirituality. Chapter 4, verse 1. Moses answered, well, God, what if they don't believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? I don't know if he's referring to the elders or to Pharaoh. Let's just say both. And Moses says, what if they don't believe me? What if they say, no, you're a liar? What if they say, no, I can't believe that? And they challenge his experience with God. And they flat out deny that the Lord appeared to him in this burning bush that spoke to him the plan of God. And it's a pretty rare thing that someone will call you a bold-faced liar. I mean, I've seen that before, where Pharaoh, Moses is afraid that people are going to call him a liar. And it's got to be a rare thing, I hope, that we would ever be accused to be a liar. Unless we really did lie, then we deserve that L letter. But they may doubt your experience with God because they have a framework for what it means to know God. They have an understanding of what the Bible is saying, and maybe it doesn't fit into their MO and their paradigm for spirituality. And they give you this look, or they snicker, or they say, I know what you're saying, but. And they're essentially saying what Moses fears that we could experience, where people challenge our spirituality. That's not the way you should have your marriage. That's not the way you should raise your kids. That's not the way the Spirit of God works. That's not the way the Bible speaks. And they're not being mean, but they just challenge us. And so Moses hears from God some arsenal that he's going to receive, and he sees it. Verse 2. Then the Lord said to him, what's that in your hand? And Moses said, a staff. And the Lord said, throw it down on the ground. And Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Must have jumped. And then the Lord said, verse 4, to him, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. He said, what? And then he reached out and took it by the tail, and Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. This, said the Lord, so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. Then the Lord said, put your hand inside your cloak, your jacket. So Moses put his hand into his jacket, and when he took it out, the skin was leprous. It had become white as snow. Now put it back into your cloak. He said, wow. So Moses put his hand back into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. And then the Lord said, if they do not believe you or pay attention to the first sign, they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. And the water you take from the river will become blood on the ground. And Moses is thinking, Vegas, sign me up. No, he's not thinking that. It's not a magic act. It's the power of God in his life that is an authenticating mark of the presence of God in his life. And we may not be able to throw a stick down and it becomes a snake and pick it up. And, it's one of those things, disclaimer, kids, don't try this at home. But God does still work today. And the God that we worship, I am who I am, he still has a transformative, life-altering effect in your life and mine. And it's the ongoing integrity of our actions that bolsters, the ongoing integrity of our actions that bolsters the integrity of our words. And so the life becomes indisputable evidence for what we're saying is truly of God, and that others don't have a leg to stand on in challenging our spirituality. Take a look at verses 10 and following. We deny our talent back to ourselves. I mean, others might challenge us, others might question our authority, but then back to ourselves, we not only think that we're not the right fit, but we deny our talent. Verse 10, Moses said to the Lord, he knows he's pushing the envelope, "Pardon your servant, Lord." Excuse me. Just be patient. I've never been good with my words. I've never been to Toastmasters. I've never had a preaching class. I shake in my sandals before people. I get tongue-tied. You know how it is, I stand up and my mind goes blank. I've never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. In other words, God, forever. I've never been a speaker. I am slow of tongue, slow of speech, and slow of tongue. And God, if I hear you right, what you have for me is a job that requires a lot of speaking, and I'm not that type of person. So God, take me out of the equation. The Lord said to him, verse 11, "Who gave human beings their mouth?" Oh, you. "Who makes them deaf or mute?" You. "Who gives them sight or makes them blind?" Okay, God, I know it's you. And God says, "Is it not I, the Lord? Now go." He's repeating that same command in verse 10. "Now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." You see, when we say that God is I am who I am, God is above us, God is with us, God is for us, and most importantly, God is in us. One last chance. Moses is just flat out rejection. Delete this call. Block this caller. God, no more. Spam identified. I don't want this. But Moses said, verse 13, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else. Not me." Then the Lord's anger, really patient. Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, not just the bush, but now it's the Lord burning against Moses. And he said, "What about your brother Aaron the Levite? Okay, you need a speaker? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. You shall speak to him." Can't you do that? Okay, you got to do that. "You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you," and which he did, the people of God. "And it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him, because you're supplying the words. But take this staff in your hand so that you can perform the signs with it." You see, we try to wiggle and jiggle and get out of everything that God wants us, but God says, "You know what? I am who I am. I got you covered. I am with you. I am for you. I am in you." And God says to Moses, and he says to us, "Okay, you need someone else? I'm going to compliment you. complement. I'm going to compliment you with people that compensate for your shortcomings. Because you're not alone. That's why it's called the body of Christ. And I'm going to be with you. You're not walking back into Egypt alone. I have never done anything like this before. I've never been on live stream. I've done YouTube Live with some of the things at UCLA, which really scared me because you talked into a computer. But I've never done a live stream, and we have about, what's the number back there? 22 people in our sanctuary this morning, and we have thousands watching in the world. Thank you. But for the past 30 plus years, I am deeply honored and blessed and privileged to be able to study the Word of God and to connect it with people, because I not only love to be in the Bible, but I love to be with people. That's why I go to Costco every day. And I try to put into practice what I learned from my professors of preaching. I don't want them to roll over in their grave. I want them to feel like that their classrooms were impactful in the likes of people like me who first started taking classes in seminary at age 23. And when there's a room full of people, I naturally feel the gravity of the responsibility, because so many lives are at stake as we connect the Word of God to the lives of people. But in a virtually empty sanctuary, due to a shutting down of our worship gatherings because of the coronavirus, the weightiness and the sacredness of our role as God's mouthpiece becomes even more clear. And it's not just for me as a communicator and as a pastor, but it's also for you as a mouthpiece of God, as a representative of His truth. With so much concern and unprecedented panic literally around the world, because that's what a pandemic is. It's an international sense of fear that grips us. In the midst of all that's happening with COVID-19, the Lord calls you to a new role. And that role, like Moses, is to represent God who delivers peace in a world that is overwhelmed and petrified with fear. And rather than being sidelined with timidity, God calls your name. He says, "You're next." And He postures us to speak with boldness. But just like this Midianite shepherd who had 2 acts, 40 years there, 40 years there, retirementville down the road, he had a 3rd act as the leader of the people of God out of Egypt into the promised land. And that 3rd act would be his greatest act. But just like him, we could naturally question our own fitness. We could worry about people challenging our authority in the one that we represent. Because even as we debate who we are, the Lord declares, "I am who I am." God is above you, and that gives you confidence. God is with you, and that gives you a calm. Just like when Jesus was with the disciples in the boat, they were scared spitless, even as professional fishermen, but they experienced a calming of not only the waves and the wind, but of their own hearts, knowing that Jesus was with them. And that God is for you as an advocate, and that gives you courage to speak the reality of the gospel of peace. And most of all, God is in you. And that gives you this calm and this collectiveness and this ability to communicate that, God, we're not alone. We've got each other. But most of all, we have you. Let's pray together. God, we feel so much emotion. I feel the emotion in my own heart. And Lord, there are seasons of life where we sense how fragile we are, how needy we are, how things are out of our control. But God, you are the I am, who I am. Lord, we offer up and cast our cares upon you because we know that you care for us and that where we stand, is your love. And in that place, there's no fear. We pray this in Jesus' name.